And before we move on to today's topic of your planned preparation for the Police Academy, and we talk about this Smart Study success system, I'd like to talk quickly about some of the other questions I didn't get to last week, if I didn't already get back to you directly by email. The first point I'd like to expand about, which was actually from last week, was this idea of the winner's attitude. I had a few questions on how to really establish this mindset. For example, I know that some people had some issues with, well, yes, I can see what not to do there, but what is it that I can really focus on to start off my day with this attitude? And I can just talk about this really quickly here, and the one point I would give, if I could just pass on one extra piece of information there, is all about the attitude of gratitude. So to feel grateful for what you already have and what you've already done is really the secret underlying this idea of the winner's attitude. And we've talked about this a little bit before in earlier videos before this series, which was all about the idea that you can't actually think of two things at once properly. So if you really get an overwhelming feeling about gratitude and everything that you have got to be thankful for, then it's very difficult to get drummed down by this idea of I'm a victim or life is overwhelming me. So that's a real quick point you can take away from that, is really focus on gratitude and then put that in the context of all those other points I talked about with the police mindset, and that may help you out. The rest of the questions really covered off three main points, and here they are right here: police selection, police fitness, and police exams. So yes, I am still receiving a lot of questions about those of you still in the selection phase. So I do understand that quite a few of you, albeit interested in your academy preparation, are still needing that support as you go through the police entrance exams. So although there are different resources for that, today's webinar will really help you out, because what we're talking about in terms of study, you can apply in terms of your own preparation for police entrance exams. So today we'll really answer some of those questions. Police fitness, we are also going to cover that in the webinar series. That's sort of in 2 webinars time. You'll learn a lot more about that. And the third area about police exams, again, comes back to that idea of police selection and those of you still in that exam component. And for those of you who were asking about police exams, you'll be very excited with what today's bonus is going to be. So make sure you stick around through the webinar and find out all about your free bonus that you'll be receiving in your video replay download. Now, getting back to today's content, let's really get started here, is all about this planned preparation, and the system I'm going to give it to you in is what I call the Smart Study Success System, and how this fits into recruit study specifically. Again, you can apply this to all different areas of study. I certainly have myself, and those of you in the police entrance exams, you'll find some real value here. And this Smart Study Success System is basically a 4-step process that you go through prior to commencing your study. And you can do this as the topics progress, and I'm going to explain this in detail to you. And underlying these 4 steps are some great practical tools we're going to discuss today, so that can really enhance your learning and retention as you go through the course. Because the reason I call this the Smart Study Success System is it's not just about learning, but also learning efficiently. Okay, so because as you're about to discover with Police Academy, it's not good enough to simply learn, you need to learn quickly. So anything you can do to learn more efficiently is going to help you out a lot. In fact, right towards the end of today's webinar, I'm going to give you a key technique that I used at the Academy that I believe was critical in enabling me to score up to 100% on some of the legal tests. Now, I'm not guaranteeing that sort of result for you, but if you do apply this principle, you will have a much, much easier time of it. Plus, you won't need to spend so much time in pre-exam study. So we'll talk about that right towards the end of the webinar. So first of all, recruit study. Some of you will receive pre-study before you get to the Academy, and by all means, you need to pay attention to that and learn what is required. However, as far as I'm still aware, that's not normally the case. You're not going to get pre-study packages. So those of you asking about your pre-course ideas about, should I do this certificate course or this diploma course prior to, I would advise some caution, because what you need to be careful of is pre-learning some material that you may need to unlearn when it contradicts what's taught at the Academy. Sometimes a clean slate is the best way to approach a new course. So That's why what I'm teaching here today is more about systems and ideas that you can apply to your study without trying to confuse you on the actual material that you're going to learn. So just a word of caution there on taking pre-courses prior to the academy that aim to teach you actual legal studies, for example. So how does this work? Well, the Smart Study Success System is basically 4 steps that combine to give you the best possible chance of success in your study and overall retention of everything you need to learn. Because what you learn at the academy is not just about passing the academy. What you learn at the academy is really about applying yourself as a police officer. Yes, you will have a chance to ask other officers as you go, and it's always a learning process, but you don't really want to be learning stuff later on that you could have picked up at the academy. Again, it's a waste of time, but also it's going to hurt your reputation as soon as you get out of the academy. You really want to turn up on your first day as someone that appears quite switched on. So if you can implement these 4 steps prior to each topic, you'll go a long way to both enhancing your performance, but also enhancing the first impression you make with your fellow officers once you graduate. So step 1 of the Smart Study Success System is to identify your reasons. Now, if you've spent any time with me at all in the other videos or the ebooks I've written, you know I am a big advocate of understanding your reasons before you do anything. Because basically, if you have a big enough reason for doing something, then you can do anything. Conversely, if you don't understand the reason you're doing something, it's very easy to get distracted, procrastinate, and lose focus, and therefore just fall off the bandwagon. So identifying your reasons is the key first step. Now, at the police academy, this is fairly simple. Your reasons can be as simple as graduating, but what I'm really talking about is a deeper level of motivation, intrinsic motivation that you don't have to draw on from somebody else to tell you that you should study, but you actually want to learn this material. And so one of the great ways you can do this is, as you pick up each topic, look to determine exactly how that's going to translate into your role or your profession as a police officer. And if it's not clear to you, then go out and seek that clarification. Because if you have real clarity on how this information is critical to you as a police officer, then you're setting yourself up for a really good base of study, because your brain is going to start switching on, hey, this stuff's important, I need to retain this information. The next step of the Smart Study Success System is determining your learning style. Now, that may sound a little bit abstract to some of you. And what I'm getting at here is you may not be able to choose the format of the lessons you receive, but you can certainly choose the format of your own study. And it's your own study which is really going to benefit you in retaining the information that you need to learn. And you do this for every topic as you go. So it might differ per topic. So you may learn in a very different way with legal studies as you might learn through driver training, for example. Okay, and we're going to talk about some specific examples of that today and also further on in the webinar series when we cover those specific topics. And in the registration email I sent out last Sunday before this webinar, I attached a couple of documents there, and one of them was the pre-study planning tool. And this pre-study planning tool, this is exactly about determining your learning style. This is step 2 of the success system. So if you've got that with you, just pull it out, and I'm just going to go through this really quick. It's fairly self-explanatory, so if you haven't had a look at it, be sure to check that out after the webinar. So step 1 of the pre-study planning tool is all about looking at your history. So going back through the previous occasions where you've needed to learn information, and try to find a topic or an area that's a bit similar to what you're learning now. So if it's more theory-based, then look for a theory-based experience that you've had. And go through those items on the pre-study planning tool. There's some suggestions there to help jog your memory about what types of study suited you best, what worked, what didn't work. Maybe there's some things there you haven't tried. And we're certainly going to give you some techniques today as well that you may find very useful. The next thing is to look at the present. So look at your current circumstances. Okay, so it's no good just looking back at how you might have studied in high school when you had a very different set of responsibilities, for example. So it might have suited you in high school to do all your study after school, for example. However, now you might have all these additional responsibilities that indicate to you that maybe the morning is now the best time for you to study. So you can't just template off your previous experience. You need to put it in the context of today to determine what is the best option for me to move forward here and really make a plan for my study. And again, in the pre-study planning tool, you'll find some great questions there that you can answer about considering your exact circumstances and formulating your plan for study. Step 3 on the pre-study planning tool is about evaluating your resources. So what this means is identifying everything available to you to help implement your study plan. And when you're looking at this, try to look at things that might go wrong with your study plan and what you could do in that situation. That's basically called contingency planning, and this is also part of being a police officer. And it's very helpful if you do this with your study as well, because you need some room for error, I suppose, because your study is not always going to go to plan. So if you can plan for that, you'll have a lot better chance of maintaining your study through the academy. And step 4 of the pre-study planning tool is about reviewing the action. So this is once the study is commenced, or even after this topic is finished. This is where you review, so you can take this information and put it back into the pre-study planning tool for the next topic. So things like, well, what did work well? What was your best strategy? What is one thing you could have done better? Your strengths and weaknesses from this experience? And what were your best environments and routines for making this work? And if you could change one thing from how you prepared this time around, what would it be? And would that make sense for the next topic? So you can see the whole tool plugs back into the first step, and you're always learning, always evaluating as you go. Again, this is all listed out for you step by step in the email, which is where you registered for this webinar. If you've lost that email, no worries, just let me know and we'll send one through to you. All right, step 3 on the Smart Study Success System is all about scheduling it. And again, this is a topic that I really value, and we're going to talk about scheduling in general further on in the webinar series. But looking specifically at your study system, this is where you really implement your plan. Because if you're just talking about it, and you might have verbally gone through in your head or just to someone else, things in step 2, for example, and you're just talking about it, well, it's possible you might get around to doing it. If you start visualizing exactly how you might implement that and really plan properly, well, now you're getting a lot closer. But it's not until you actually schedule your study that it becomes real. If you put it on your scheduler, put it in your calendar, and really commit to a specific time, now you're going to take some action. Plus, the other thing that scheduling does is it makes you realize, well, how much time do I really need for this? Some of us are a little optimistic when we're doing our planning, and you might be as well in determining your learning style. And some of us are a little bit overcautious. We allocate too much time. So when you start to look at it in the context of all your other responsibilities in life, well, now you get a more realistic idea of what can you schedule and how can you study smarter to really fit this in. And that's going to plug into the techniques that we talk about that underlie this whole study success system, and we'll get to those shortly. Step 4 on the Smart Study Success System is really easy. Take action. So you've got your reasons, you know why you're doing it, you've identified your plan, your best way to proceed, you've scheduled it, now actually follow through and do it. This 4th step is key. Now, I have got a very special tool here to help you out with step 4. And it's all about that little devil we all experience from time to time, some of us more often than others, procrastination. And the other document I've attached for you in the registration email was your emergency study help tool. So let's have a quick look at this. Again, if you've got that with you, take that out. If not, check it out after the webinar. There are 5 very simple steps in the emergency study help guide. Step 1, get some perspective on where you are right now. Why are you doing this study, and what's it going to cost you if you don't do this study? If you don't take some action right now, what is the potential consequence? And also look at the flip side, what can you gain by doing this? Step 2 is to evaluate your position. So what have you done thus far? And what do you need to do from here? So take a step back here and look at exactly where you're up to in the scheme of your plan. If you don't have a plan, now's a good time to go back to that pre-study planning tool. Step 3 is identifying your obstacles. So what is actually preventing you right now, or what's distracting you right now from taking action on your study? What is it that's so important that it's overriding your actual reasons for doing the study? And if you identify these, now you're in a position to take some action. You might either deal with it right now or simply just push it to your calendar somewhere else. Verbalizing it to yourself can really crystallize the issue, and sometimes it's as simple as that. You can identify it and simply move on. Once you've done that, get back on track with step 4, which is to set your immediate goals. So set a goal for the outcome of this study session. If you've actually scheduled some time, you know what time you've got left, identify what is it that you want to get done just by the end of this session. Immediate goals is another way of saying, well, how do I chunk this down into smaller pieces? Oftentimes when we procrastinate, the reason is we've sort of made the whole task too big a deal in our head. Okay, you might be studying for a legal topic, for example, and there's several different themes, dozens of lists you have to remember. It all becomes a bit overwhelming. So what you can do is say, well, maybe I can make a better plan for this, which I'll do later in my next study session, but today I'm just going to learn this list, and this theory. And that'll help you really understand where does today fit in with the scheme of things. And now you can get on to step 5, take immediate action, as in right now. And this can again be broken down into chunks. For example, what is one small action you can do right now to get started? And what's one big action you can do today to build on that momentum? Because once you've memorized that first list, because you might now get in flow. And now it's like, oh, well, this is not too bad. I've known this list. Let's get on to the other 2. Because you get in momentum. So you don't want to spend your entire study period going back to step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of this study help tool. But I think you'll find that the more you get a habit of these steps, the less you'll need to use them, because you start to get clear on the initial reasons you had, and you really get that intrinsic sense of motivation to keep studying, and what used to distract you will simply become a minor interruption. You get back on track straight away. Again, if you don't have this tool with you, let me know. It was in the registration email, but again, if you've lost that email, just let me know and we'll send it through to you. So that's the actual 4-step process you can walk through prior to each topic as you go through the academy. And again, for those of you still in the stage of police entrance exams, you can do this very same thing with preparing your study for each phase of selection. As I mentioned earlier, underlying this study success system is the actual techniques, the real tools and techniques you use in study to retain information. And whilst there's a list of this that would be endless, what I'm going to share with you today is what I used at the Police Academy, and I'm going to walk you through these techniques, and you may find them of use personally. Now, before I go through these steps, and I'm going to cover 3 different points here, I really want to make sure you're enrolled in this and you're enthusiastic about learning this. So what I'd like you to understand is that these techniques are not just simply different things to try out, but there's real benefits to learning this stuff. For example, your results or your ability to retain information has very little to do with the length of time you allocate to study, but rather it's your actual ability to retain information. So the techniques you use, for example, some of the ones I'm about to share with you, and particularly the last point that I share, are really going to help you shave minutes, hours, sometimes even days off the amount of pre-exam study you need to do to retain the information. In fact, that's one of the key points. If you can retain the information in any course of study as you go, then your pre-exam study really becomes a bit of a confidence booster, just familiarizing yourself with the material again, rather than really trying to learn specific things that you didn't pick up on in the first place. Okay, if you do that, you're really on the back foot. So take a look at these techniques. These are what you need to really hit the ground running. The first topic I want to talk about is note-taking. And this is a controversial form of study nowadays, because you're going to sit through PowerPoint lessons, similar to what we've been doing already, and sometimes the instructor is going to give you the PowerPoint slides before the class or after the class. And I know one of the reasons that people do this is so that you pay attention and you're not busy taking notes because you've already got the notes. However, there is quite a lot of research in this field that suggests the actual action of taking notes is what's helping you retain the information. So just because you've got the notes prior to, it doesn't necessarily mean that you won't benefit from writing your own notes. There is an author I came across, Henriette Ann Clauser, who said that writing triggers the reticular activating system, which is something we talked about earlier, which in turn sends a signal to the cerebral cortex saying, wake up, pay attention, and don't miss this detail. Once you write down a goal, your brain will be working overtime to see it, get it, and will alert you to the signs and signals that were there all along. And she said this in a book she wrote that was called Write It Down, Make It Happen, which I, of course, love the title of that book because that's something I always say at the end of all these webinars and videos is make it happen. So if you are interested in retaining the information first time around as you learn it, then taking notes can really help you. Again, you need to experiment with this to find out what works for you. But I certainly noticed that I was retaining information quite well when I took the effort to write it down. One additional point I'd like you to consider when using this tool is it doesn't necessarily mean writing it down in the class. It may mean that you pay attention during the class, you make some quick notes, but once you've identified what's key, and trust me, at the Academy, sometimes they'll even tell you what are the key components, i.e. what's going to be in the exam. Those are the points that you really want to write down afterwards in your post-class study. So exactly when you're doing that, that ties back into your earlier pre-studying planning tool. So did you decide that you'd be better off studying immediately after the class, before the class the next day? Totally up to you. And at the end of this webinar, I'm going to talk you through a case study of what I did with legal studies. The next technique I'm going to talk about, and we're going to talk about this in detail, is this idea of memory hooks. And this is the idea of using visualization in very different ways, sometimes very creative and very outlandish, crazy ways, to remember what would ordinarily be quite bland information. So before we talk about this one in more detail, I'm going to talk about visualization. Because I know some of you, as soon as you hear the word visualization, you might start to switch off. Okay, because you say, well, I don't visualize. So I'm going to talk a little bit about visualization. I know that one of the reasons that a lot of people are turned off visualization is because, well, they might think I don't do it very well, so therefore I can't do it. Okay, you might have this incorrect assumption that when people say, oh, I can visualize, they have these crystal clear images. It's like an HD television going off in their head. That is not the case. Most people, it's quite vague, very hard to explain to someone else, but it's still visualization. So you can visualize. Now, the more you do this, the better you get at it. But everybody can visualize, generally. Try this quick exercise. Take one last look at this slide. Okay, now close your eyes. Now I want you to imagine looking at the slide without opening your eyes and remember one color that you saw on the slide or one picture that you saw on the slide. You might even be able to remember the entire slide. Now, if you're doing that, you're visualizing because you're not physically seeing it with your eyes. So if you open your eyes now, and you can see the slide. If you visualized, if you thought of anything that was on this page, then you can visualize. Now, if that didn't work for you, that's exactly what you can start doing as practice. Okay, so just pick something and pick maybe a bright object, look at it, close your eyes and try visualize it. Now, most of you won't need to go to that level of detail, but those of you out there who are struggling, that's your very beginning step to visualizing. Now, if you want some more resources on that, I'm more than happy to provide. Just send me an email and I'll get through to you. All right, the first type of memory hook we're going to talk about is this idea of this pure link system. This is a system of basically using crazy, creative, and outlandish stories to relate each item on a list to another. And this is called many different things. In this example, we're calling it the pure link system. And we're going to use a non-police example here. As I mentioned earlier, I'm not interested in confusing you on your actual topics you're going to learn at the Academy. What I am interested in is giving you tools and techniques that you can apply in your police course of study. So we're going to take an example list that makes very little sense and is therefore very hard to remember in isolation, just like certain police topics. So I'd like you to imagine a spaceship captain has to remember 10 things that she must do before she takes off in the spaceship. And here's the item list. Now I know some of these don't make any sense to you at all, but I'm going to go through this list with you, and these are sort of the words that are triggering what I'm talking about. Now this is not the system to remember it, but I'm just going to go through them. The first thing she must do is check frost on the outside of the plane. She must then pull all the rocks out of the exhaust ports, clean the hyperdrive outlet, give each of her passengers a banana and 2 cherries. She must call the control tower to request permission to take off. She must put on her spacesuit. She must get in the cockpit. She must check all the instruments, turn on the music system, and read the navigation instructions. So I know this is a ridiculous list, but I'm using it as a piece of random information to help you remember anything. Now, if I took this list off the screen, some of you or many of you may struggle to recall how many items there were, or in fact, list off all the items. And if I asked you to read back that sequence in order, now I think a lot of people would be struggling. But if you apply what I'm about to teach you, not only will you remember the number of things she had to do, the items that she had to do, but you'll also remember the exact sequence that I told you it in. So let's take a look at how this works. What I'm going to do is walk you through each point and how you would relate it to the next in terms of a very odd story. So again, this will sound very strange, but bear with me, because once we've done this, I'm going to give you another list of words to use, and you can try this out yourself after the webinar. Once you've done that, if you've got some more questions, please email me through and I'll help you out a little more. So looking back at this crazy spaceship pilot scenario, what does she have to do? Right, so step one, first thing I gave was she had to check the outside of the plane for frost. So I'm going to imagine in my head a story here, and this is how the story goes. The first thing I do is I imagine myself slipping over on some slippery ground. This reminds me about the frost. As I fall on the ground, a whole pile of rocks fall on my head, and this reminds me that she has to remove the rocks from the exhaust ports. As these rocks fall on me, I start picking them up and cleaning them, start polishing them all off, which reminds me that she has to clean the hyperdrive. Right, now, once I finish cleaning the rocks, I get up and start to walk again, but I slip over again, and this time I've slipped on a banana and I land on 2 cherries right on my bottom. And this reminds me that she has to give each passenger 1 banana and 2 cherries. Now in the story, I'm visualizing her giving the banana and the cherries to the passengers, and I'm seeing that one of the passengers is talking on a phone, and they give the phone to the pilot. And this reminds me that she's taking the phone because she needs permission to take off. Now I'm visualizing the whole situation there. I see her using the phone, calling the tower, so that of course reminds me to call the control. Now as everybody's getting on the spaceship, I realize that she needs to get on the spaceship, and she goes to get on, and there's a big sign over the door that says spacesuit, and I'm seeing the sign. So it reminds me as I'm visualizing her getting on that she needs to put on her spacesuit. And the rest of the story now follows a logical sequence for me because I'm visualizing as if she's there getting on the spaceship. So I think, okay, the logical next thing is where's she going? She's the pilot. She's going to the cockpit, which is the next item on the list. Now in the cockpit, I imagine when she walks in, she has to push past this big cello. Okay, this is just a very crazy thing, and the more crazy ideas you use in your story, the more memorable they are. So there's this big cello in the way, and she has to push past it. And that reminds me that she needs to check the instruments. Now, as she's checking the instruments, because I've got the idea of the cello in my head, I remember, well, there's all these other instruments here. She has to remember to turn on the music, and that's the next item. And now she sits down, everything's done, and is thinking, where am I going? Because that's naturally the next logical thing to do when she's about to fly. So I remember the last point, which was that she needed to read the navigation instructions. So there's the 10-point list, and you can see how I listed back every item in order in a story in my head. So now it doesn't matter. I could leave this list for another week or two, and that story is just crazy enough that I'll remember every point. And as I go through the story, I remember the words. So I know this sounds really crazy and flipped out, but millions of people use this technique because it works. And I certainly used it at the academy with all the lists I needed to remember through legal study and remembering certain rules of what I can and cannot do as a police officer. Now, I've just remembered the actual list of words that I wanted you to try. I've actually already given to you, and they're in that registration email. So go back to that email and you'll see those list of words. They're very strange. Those of you that haven't already checked, the words are sausage, key, golf, cloud, water, police officer, car, wall, baby, and submarine. So as you can see, none of those words really relate to another terribly well. But if you make yourself up a very ridiculous story, then you will in fact remember the list, and you'll be able to remember it in order, which is not always important, but if you need to remember something in order, this is very helpful. Now, the next step I'm going to talk about is exactly how to take a more structured approach. Because I know that inventing the stories can be a bit tricky for a lot of people, And if you're not willing to take that real creative approach to it, what you can is take a more structured approach. And this is still memory hooks, and this is the idea of numbered memory hooks. Now, this is still about visualization, but it is a little more simple. The way this works is you're numbering off items 1 through whatever you need. You might go up to 20. Now, we don't have time to go up to 20 today, so I'm just going to give you a quick example of how you might use this, numbering off 1 through 5. So the way it works is you have a visualization for what each number means, and then you are hooking, if you will, each item on to that initial visualization. If that sounds confusing, don't worry, I'm going to walk you through it with pictures right here. So we're going to look at the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the base of this is your visualization of the numbers. So in this case, we're going to visualize the number 1 with a lighthouse. Okay, for obvious reason, it looks a bit like a 1. So we have an image of our lighthouse in our head. Our second memory is a pair of glasses. When you think of a pair of glasses, you think of the number 2. So 2 is glasses. 3, we're going to use a stool because we think of a 3-legged bar stool. The number 4 is a window because stereotypically or culturally, when we think of a window, we may think of a 4-panel window. Now, if these pictures don't work for you, please use something that will work for you. The best way to figure that out is to think of the number and then think of the first picture that pops into your head. For example, I don't want to confuse you, but I'm going to give you another one for 4. Other people relate better to the way words rhyme. So you might think of, instead of 4, you might think of it as that's right, a door. So you see a door, okay? But it's totally up to you. You need to use what works for you. In this case, we have a window. And 5, again, if we were sticking with the verbal cues, we could use a beehive because hive rhymes with 5. But because we're using the visual cues, we're going to go with 5 being a hand. Because we think of a hand, we see our 5 digits. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in our head as pictures. Now, what this allows us to do is take those pictures and do something to them to remember the items. So the way this might work with the last list is we have our lighthouse, which indicates 1. So my first item is check for frost. So I'm imagining a lighthouse all frozen up. So it's on the high seas, you've got this craggy outcrop right off the side of an island and a frozen lighthouse. Number 2, I imagine someone smashing those glasses with a rock. So I got smashed glasses with a rock. Number 3 is a bit weird because we had our hyperdrive, cleaning the hyperdrive. And I'm going to imagine that spinning on top of that stool, sort of floating there, is this futuristic engine-looking thing. And so I've got this visualization in my head of this stool with this piece of advanced technology on it. And that's to clean the hyperdrive. Number 4 was the fruit being given to the passengers. So I'm going to visualize fruit smeared across the window. So I've got this picture of a window in my head with a banana squished to the side of it and these 2 cherries stuck to each end of that banana. And that reminds me about the banana and the cherries. And number 5, well, now I'm thinking of a hand, and I'm thinking of that hand holding, you guessed it, a mobile phone. So I think of that hand holding a phone, and now I've got item number 5, which is to call the control with that mobile. So that's another way you can do it with the numbered memory hooks. So personally, I didn't use that system. I used the first system of the crazy stories to remember things. And I found that with practice, I got a lot quicker at doing it. So in the first place, I'd have to write down the list of words and then sort of make a story gradually as I went and then try to remember the story. However, as I got further on in the academy and I started using this for all these different things I had to remember, I used it to remember sequences in weapon parts and sequences I needed to remember when getting in a police car, for example. I found that once I saw the list, I would walk through it in my head and the stories would start to flow. So it's a little bit crazy, but it works. And it also sounds so simple. You look at this stuff and think, surely this is stuff that primary school kids would do. But life doesn't have to be complicated. Sometimes the best things are just the things that are simple because they work. So you don't need to overcomplicate this. Just find something that works, apply it, refine it. If it doesn't work, throw it out. But if it does, then refine it further and keep using it. Finally, on the topic of memory hooks today, I'm going to talk about an approach we've already used in this webinar series, and that is acronyms. Now, if you're not sure what that means or you're not sure where I've already used this, let me explain something here. Take a look at these words on the screen right in front of you here. We have reliable, clever, non-complex, memory, useful, system, and orderly. Now again, if I asked you to just close your eyes and read back those words, some of you would get it, some of you wouldn't. If I made the words even longer and added sentences, then it gets real tough. And that's sort of what you have to do with the Academy. So the system I'm going to teach you here is how to use acronyms. Some people call these acrostics. And let's have another look at these words if we look at them like this. So now we see acronyms as a clever, reliable, orderly, non-complex, useful memory system. Now, I know some of you are looking at the word useful there, and you think, well, maybe I'm cheating there. And I've actually done this deliberately here because what I'm trying to demonstrate is there's no rules with this stuff. These are training tools and techniques you can use. So whatever you've got to do to remember it, as long as it works, then crack on with it. Go ahead. So in this case, I'm using the letter Y to spell U as in useful. So that doesn't technically adhere to the rule of an acronym. If you haven't worked out by now, acronyms mean using the first letter of a word to stick it to the letter of another word. So in this case, we've got A, C, R, O, N, Y, M, and S, which are the letters that spell out acronyms. And then I'm attaching all those words to each letter. So you can make up your own rules as you go on. These are simply frameworks you can use, and you can adjust them to how it works for you. So in my case, I use useful, I remember it, it works. So where do we see this before? Well, if you remember back to the first webinar and I talked about the way the letters fell out with the police mindset, and I joked about being a bit of an arse. Well, that little acronym, an arse, even though it was a bit of a joke, is what allows me, if someone said to me, well, what are the 6 steps to the police mindset? Now, I don't have them written down in front of me, but I can think of an arse and I just reel them off. And I know that the A was the attitude of a winner. The N was never-ending improvement. The next A was an analytical perspective. Then I know it was an R, which reminds me the realistic responsibility. Then we have the S, which was the stereotyping with caution, or smart stereotyping. And the E, which was all about empathy, which reminds me it was not sympathy. So empathy, not sympathy. So that's how that system works. The other great thing about using acronyms is it also helps you remember it in an order. So if you can actually make this work in order, then you've obviously got the spelling of the word, and as long as you can spell the word, then you're always going to get the same order every single time. The other way to use acronyms is to use the same letter at the front. So for example, if we looked at this list here, now this is a sample list and I am very cautiously going on to a type of police topic, and you might look at this list as an example to do something or use something. So you might say, what are the 5 reasons to use handcuffs, for example? Now, please note, these may not be the 5 reasons for you to use handcuffs. It's just an example list I'm giving you in the context of police work. So you might look at this list and think, okay, there's a really common thing that sticks out here, and that is the letter P. So I'm going to remember that this is all about the 4 Ps with an arrest. So as long as I remember the arrest word, I remember to effect an arrest, and then I can break down the 4 Ps into 2 protects and 2 prevents, and sequentially as I go through that in my head, I'm going to naturally remember, okay, protect, others and the person, and then prevent, escape, and further offense. So I've got these little mental triggers, if you like. Now again, this is not a system I used a lot at the Academy. However, I have used it in other requirements when I've needed to learn information. You might be different though. The acronym system might be perfect for you. So give it a try. If it works, all very good. If it doesn't, as I say, throw it out, use something else. Again, I'm not saying these are the reasons for using handcuffs. I'm very wary of using police examples for you guys, but I wanted to give you a quick little reference to a police context of how you might use this. So we're coming to the end of the content of today's webinar, and I'd like to give you my bonus now, which is also about study. Because in preparing today's webinar, I realized there's really a lot more information I really want to give you than we've got time for in this webinar series. So what I'm going to do for you is give every single person in the webinar a free copy of my ebook, Police Testing. Now, this is written for advanced police application techniques, so it's really based on the idea of preparing for selection exams. So those of you still in that stage, you'll get a lot of value out of this. However, if you're already in and getting ready for the academy, what I'm teaching in this ebook is a lot more detail on how you can get your state of mind in a great place for conducting exams, as well as a few other ideas about how to prepare your study routines and find out what works for you in preparing for the academy. So how do you get this? Well, at the end of this webinar, you're going to receive a video replay link via email. At the top of that email is going to be very clear writing. Click here to get your bonus ebook. Simply click on that link. It'll take you straight to the web page with that ebook. Once you get there, remember to save it, because that's just going to be displaying in your web browser. So save as and save that somewhere safe, and you can read through that at your own time. Okay, the final technique I'm going to talk about here is the monumental difference maker that I talked about right at the start of this webinar. And this is the technique called pre-reading. Now, in case that sounds a little bit simple, let me explain exactly what this is and how it works and why it works. Because this, I believe, is what allowed me to go from a very shaky start at the academy to start blitzing my exams at the academy and graduate at the top of my class. The reason pre-reading works is because of an effect called spiral learning. And the way spiral learning is if you basically imagine a piece of information spinning around in your head in a spiral, and somewhere along that spiral, it keeps crossing over an area of your brain where it retains the information. And every time it crosses over, it cements more into your memory. So the way that works is every time you read something on it, or every time someone tells you something about it, it further cements into your memory. So if you look at this in the context of pre-reading, this is the way I believe it works. If, for example, you turn up for a class, say for example it's on legal studies, and you're learning about the situations where you are in a position to arrest someone. So you're learning about the reasons to arrest someone, where you can or cannot arrest someone. If you're approaching that as fresh information, well, this is the first time the spiral strikes through that part of your brain. So the information's crossing over that part where you remember it. So it's not really in there. You've got to, you've heard it now, you've heard it once, you remember roughly being told about it. Now, when you go and do your exam on that piece of information, you might have studied after that lesson, so that's another time the spiral's gone across. But that lesson was probably a lot longer than your post-study, or at least you've had to study a long time to remember it now. So basically you end up doing a lot of exam study prior to each exam. Now, let's take another look at that scenario, and in this case, you have pre-read all the notes you could get on this topic, all the text you could find, you might have even watched some videos about it, and you've done all this before the lesson. Now, when you go to the lesson, you've already hit that path a few times, maybe 2-3 times. So when the information comes in, it's really cementing in. And because it's being taught to you now, it's not just being a superficial lesson, it's coming in a much deeper level. So you're actually noticing more things the instructor's telling you. Because when they cover off the basic principles, well, you've already come across those. So when they give you the finer points, they're what are the new pieces of information. And as a result, your retention of that lesson is far, far greater than if you'd just walked in off the street and picked up the lesson. So this is the reason pre-reading works. But this is where it's really cool. If you've done your pre-reading and now you've done that lesson, and so the information is now a little bit more sunk in, it's a little bit more in your head. Now, when you do your pre-study for the exam, because you've already retained the information at a much deeper level in the classroom, you don't need to study for as long. So basically, the trade-off can be something like this. You might do 30 minutes of pre-reading before a 1-hour lesson. So now you've done an hour and a half of training on that topic. But you might just need another 30 minutes of study now to really remember everything for the exam. But if you'd missed the pre-reading and you just do the 1-hour class, you might now take over an hour, maybe even 2 hours of combined study time to try to remember everything that came up in that class. Because when it got taught to you in the first place, some of it was just bouncing off because you didn't have that foundation base that you already understood some of the topic. So this is where your techniques in study and your planning in study really make a difference to what you remember. So if you apply all these 3 techniques, for example, you've got your note-taking that might be after the lesson, you've got your pre-reading, obviously before the lesson, and the techniques you're using are the memory hooks that you've discovered work best for you. What I believe you'll find is that now, instead of cramming and sort of haphazardly trying to study by random and just seeing what works, which could take hours. Now you've got laser focused study techniques, and you know when you're studying, both prior to how to take notes and after study each class, you're going to be a lot better prepared to retain the information. What's the end result of this? It's not just graduating. It means that when you're a police officer and you're on the street and you don't have your big leverage file of notes, you're actually going to retain some of this information so you can use it. What I'm teaching you is not just to get good scores at the academy. This is long-term retention. If you use these techniques, I can't guarantee what you're going to remember, but I can absolutely know that you're going to remember a lot more than if you approach this with the sort of haphazard shotgun approach of study that so many of us are used to. All right, we have covered a lot today. I did say I would talk very specifically about legal study, and the way I'm going to do that is give you a quick case study of what I did at the academy with my own legal study. As I mentioned earlier, I had some struggles early on at the academy, and my number one concern starting at the academy was all the legal information. I was going through the academy in my 30s, so it had been a long time since I'd done formal education, and so I was quite concerned about the theoretical aspects. So a lot of what I'm teaching here is what I developed throughout the academy. So I didn't walk in and go through the first legal lesson and think, oh, great, done my note taking, I did my pre-reading before, no problems at all, ace the next test. Didn't exactly work like that. I was quite shocked still at the amount of information that I was expected to retain for the tests. And that's what really made me knuckle down and find out, how do I optimize my studying? And I did go through a number of different resources to find all this, and I ended up using these techniques. So in terms of the case study, I'm just going to give you an example of what I discovered through my experience of legal studies. I'm not saying this is the way to do it for you, but this is just an example of how this sort of can play out for you. So what I looked at was I identified, yes, legal study is an area of concern for me. What has worked in the past for me? I was aware that writing notes was useful to me, but then I found in the classroom that in my present circumstance, I wasn't able to take notes as well because it was quite interactive training. We had to answer a lot of questions. And again, the PowerPoint slides were provided, so I sort of annotated on the side. So what I ended up doing was writing my own notes after the lesson. Now, again, in the past, I had been used to taking notes that evening after the lesson. However, this was quite different. I was in my 30s, I had a family. I couldn't just go home and do my study. So what I discovered was my best study time was in the mornings. So the routine I ended up with was that I would do my homework, as it were, plus any writing of my own notes. I would do that the following morning. So I was still doing it after the class, but I was getting to the academy early enough and doing it in the morning. So this appeared a bit strange to other people. There wasn't many people coming in early to do study, but I wasn't doing any study in the afternoon. I was doing it in the morning. And this again worked well for me. I did my note taking then, I went through my memory hooks then, plus on the back of that, I was able to do my pre-reading. Now, I didn't always do it that way. Sometimes I did some of the pre-reading at home when I did get a chance, but I certainly had identified that my best time for study was prior to the class. So my note taking and memory hook activity, that was prior to. My pre-reading, I sort of fit in where I could. Having a look at the actual class timetable, what a concept, because they will give you one likely. You can look ahead, see what's coming up, and find out some information that you can read beforehand. Now, not just any information, I was looking at the notes that they had given us. Okay, we had some notes on what was coming up and we could read into it. In terms of my actual preparation for the exams, if you have a look at your free bonus I've included, because I don't have time to keep going with it today, the information in there, what I talk about there is some of the routines I used and the considerations I made to optimize my actual exam preparation. And this is how I dramatically improved my results and ended up scoring really, really high scores throughout those legal tests. I know some of you are looking for more specific guidance on how to prepare for your legal study, for your police academy. What I'd like to offer you though is that I didn't prepare in terms of learning any law stuff at all before I started the academy. I really took that approach of a clean slate, and I really think this helped me because I didn't have any sort of preconceptions. But the other thing that helped me, I didn't watch a lot of TV, so I didn't have a lot of preconceptions about what happens in the movies versus what happens in real life with police officers. So if you have got some assumptions based on something you might have seen on TV or a movie, needless to say, leave those at the door when you start the academy. That piece of advice can save you a lot of time. I know that sounds a little bit ridiculous, but you will be surprised when you meet some of the other recruits at the academy how much our culture through television has given us really basically false information about law enforcement. Okay, we've gone way over today, and I don't have any time to answer any of your specific questions today. However, be assured I will get back to you on the email if we've got some really common questions here, and I can already see that one of them is, where do you find the time to actually do this? And isn't this allowed for at the academy? That sort of question I'll cover either in the direct email responses to you, or I'll do a quick summary at the start of next week's webinar. And next week is very exciting. We're going to be starting your progressive preview. This is what I call the Police Academy Kickstarter package. And this is where we go deep into the actual topics and fields of training at the academy. So you can really hit the ground running as you progress through each component. Like the pre-reading strategy we talked about earlier, this preview is what can set you up for success before you even start. You see, managing your expectations and taking a little action now can make huge differences and really a shift in your final expectations and your final destination, including your level of success at the academy. So please be sure to register for the coming webinar for your Police Academy Kickstarter package. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us today in the webinar. Don't forget to check out your free ebook in the video replay that will come through in the hour after the webinar. So until next week, keep up your preparations, visualize your success, and as Henriette Ann Clauser said, make it happen.